Order, and welcome to the Energy Security and Net Zero Select Committee, our session on the work of the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority as part of the initial scrutiny of the work of the Department of Energy and Net Zero through the focus of its various executive agencies and public bodies. And we welcome the NDA today. I will ask you to introduce yourselves before we start our questions.
Thank you, Chair, and it's a great pleasure to be before the committee today. I'm David Peattie, the Group Chief Executive of the UK's Nuclear Decommissioning Authority.
Good afternoon. My name's Euan Hutton. I'm Chief Executive of Sellafield Limited.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Corhyn Parr, Chief Executive of Nuclear Waste Services.
Well, thank you all very much for joining us. And David and I had a brief conversation on Friday. You were kind enough to write to me with some details, and I noticed in your letter you made you commented about reducing the UK's highest hazards and risks. Many people still have an association of the decommissioning of nuclear waste as being of risk, of danger, of waste, of radiation. Tell us how far you've come since the days perhaps when I was a little younger, and that was a perception that most people had.
Yes, indeed. I can remember those days as well, Chair. Perhaps I could kick off and then ask colleagues to add anything that they wish. The work of the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority actually goes back almost 80 years to the beginning of the nuclear development here in the UK. It obviously began with work done on our civil sites to support the defence programme immediately after the Second World War. And that then led to a series of separate builds of nuclear power stations at Sellafield and then in other sites around the UK. And I think it's fair to say that the context at the time, the last thing on the minds of the people building those stations and getting ready to support the defence programme and indeed generate electricity was on decommissioning, was indeed how on earth were we going to deal with the waste and the reactors that ultimately would be left in our care. So I'm pleased to say, and you and I no doubt will comment, that actually just this year, so almost 80 years on, is the first year that we've been successfully removing material from the most hazardous sites at Sellafield, known as the legacy ponds and silos. They are exactly what they are described as. Big, some of you will have seen them, big open-air concrete ponds and huge silos that were used to store waste from those reactors over many decades. So we still have, as you'll see from the various papers, we still have about 120 years to go, believe it or not. I know it's an extraordinary length of time before we can clean up all of our sites, with an estimated discounted cost to the UK taxpayer of £105 billion. We spend £4 billion a year of money on that. We do earn £1 billion, and if I may just briefly digress, Sellafield particularly is always seen as a liability for the country, and indeed it is, and that's where our highest hazard risks are. But it's also a huge asset. The skills of the workforce there, the work we do to support the EDF AGR reactors that are currently generating power for the UK. We refuel those, we defuel the ones that are coming off the generating system, and we obviously look after the world's largest stock of civil plutonium at Sellafield, which really is one of our highest priorities. So just to quickly summarise, Chair, again, rather than giving an even longer answer, is we've been at this for a very long time. We're going to be at it for a very long time. We believe we have the right skills. We are world leading in many of these areas. Our big focus is at Sellafield and reducing the hazard there.
Well, thank you very much. We will explore much of what you said in detail over the next hour or so, I think. I should declare my membership of the Nuclear APPG and of the GMB Union at this point as well. Others will declare their interests as we get to them. Now, the National Audit Office recently examined if you were taking if the NDA and Sellafield Limited are taking a sustainable approach to decommissioning. Your words, in fact, to me, You said the report presents a fairly balanced picture. Curious, where you say fairly balanced, to what extent doesn't it present a balanced picture?
Yeah, I do think the NAO report, we were very involved in its preparation, worked closely with the NAO team, and I think fairly balanced is our fair assessment of it. At the heart of it, for me, in the overall assessment that the NAO were unable to say that yet that the NDA and Sellafield were delivering value for money for the taxpayer. And I would be the first to admit there are areas where we can improve, particularly on our capital projects. But the NAO themselves have said their prime criterion of measuring value for money is assessing the outturn cost of capital projects compared to the initial estimate of those capital projects a priori. Now, the nature of our projects is that they are largely first of a kind. They've never been done before anywhere in the world. They're very complex. And there's always a degree of optimism bias, particularly in the teams that we tend to have, who have a real gung-ho attitude of ability to really get things done. And I think that has led to a bias of underestimating the costs at the start of a project and then tending to, as it were, disappoint because we end up costing a lot more than we originally forecast.
And you think the NAO spotting that is unfair?
No, I don't think it's unfair. I think under the NAO aegis, they rightly look at a fairly narrow definition of value for money. They have a really difficult job assessing value for money, particularly in our areas. For instance, how do you assess the value to the nation of keeping 140 tonnes of plutonium safe and secure? How do you put a value on the nation of the skills we have internationally recognised at Sellafield? How do you put a value on the nation of keeping the AGRs, keeping the lights on? And indeed, now that it's in the public domain, we can talk about this. In 2018, we were asked to help the clean-up of the Salisbury poisoning after the Novichok poisoning of the Skripals. We were very keen to help the UK, and some of our heroic workers from Sellafield went to Salisbury to help the clean-up. Again, how do you put a value on that? So I'm trying to paint an impression here that we do a hell of a lot more than just manage capital projects. And I think
you'd like the NAO to have given you a bit more credit.
Well, I think they've given us a fair amount of credit in this report. They do talk about how the reorganisation of the NDA over the last few years has already added 170 million of savings a year, and there's more to come on that. But and I have encouraged the NAO and will do at the Public Accounts Committee late in the new year to perhaps think more broadly than just looking at that narrow definition of value for money.
Okay.
Can I follow up?
Yes, please.
I'm interested in this idea of optimism bias. What are you doing to correct it?
Yeah, great question. I mean, a lot, I would say. One issue we've often had is coming up with single point estimates for our capital projects at the start. There's a technique known as reference class forecasting, which is used in the oil and gas sector, where you look at a major capital project and you break it down into its constituent parts, and you can benchmark each of the individual bits and then develop what's more a broader range at the start than a single point. We know Treasury is really keen on single point estimates, but we are working now, and I think starting to persuade people that for these kind of projects, actually carrying a range, and it could be quite a broad range, plus or minus 100%, is a more sensible approach. By saying to our teams, look, you don't have to just put your heroic estimate of and all the elements of this. Step right back, think about what might go wrong, and remember you've got a range.
Well, also, I'm sorry to press this point, but you are an organisation that deals in an industry in which attitudes towards risk are a significant part of whether you success or fail. So I'm interested that to have an optimism bias in your costs sounds like that seems to be a bit out of kilter with how you will be somewhat, I would have thought, pretty robust on risk, except for not in the cost scenario.
Well, let me be clear, we are absolutely robust on our approach to nuclear safety on all of our sites.
But not on cost.
But when our teams are being asked to assess what do you think it's going to cost to clear this building, they will I think it's human nature to say, oh well, you know, if this goes this way, it will only cost this, and we tend to always surprise ourselves on the downside. In other words, we rarely go into a building or a facility, and it's better than we thought it was at the time. So that's been the heart of it. We are improving. I think we've got more way to go, and the NAO report is helping us in that regard.
Yeah. I think it's a bit odd that you're getting your risk. You're not overstating or understating the level of risk on the one hand, but you are. I thought there was a way of measuring if you know how much risk you're expecting, how much it's going to cost. So I'm not sure that quite comes across. But rather than continuing to press the point, can you just confirm, as far as you're concerned, you're not going to be underestimating costs from now on?
Yes, we are. In all of our recost estimate and our new projects, I think we're giving a much more balanced, realistic approach, and as I say, using ranges rather than single points to acknowledge the uncertainty in these big capital projects.
Right. Is there anything particularly that keeps you awake at night?
That's a great question. I am a good sleeper, always have been. I trust the team, and we have two of the chief execs from our operating companies with us today. We have a very strong team across the sector. I'm always conscious that we carry a very heavy responsibility on behalf of the nation for the jobs that we do, but equally I'm always aware it's a great privilege to hold these jobs. If the four things I carry with me, my big worries, the 4 S's: safety and security, skills, spending, and cyber.
Yeah. Corhyn, anything keep you awake at night?
So from a waste point of view, I mean, we've been managing radioactive waste and disposing of it for many, many decades. For me, it's more the future plan for the geological disposal facility. It's a complex project. It will be probably the 4th in the world. So for me, it's about just bringing the experience from the global sphere into our project here in the UK.
Well, we'll have more questions on the GF. And Euan, how about you?
I think for me, talking about safety and security, I don't worry about that because of the quality of the people that we've got and the focus that we put on those areas. I'm sorry, I'm really boring, but it's the resilience and the skills. The thing that I worry about is making sure that we can continue to attract the next generation to bring to the organisation the things that we're going to need for what is many decades of really interesting work.
Okay. Now, have there been any compromises made during the time of austerity in government spending that you hope to reverse in a period where perhaps there's going to be more money available, or do you think there's going to be more money available?
We've never compromised on safety or security. That's the most important thing to say. And over the last few years, we have had increasing grant funding to the NDA through Treasury and our department, formerly BEIS, now DESNES. I think next year is going to be particularly challenging. We've often had as much money as we need, but not as much as we want, and I think that pressure can be helpful in forcing further discipline on where we spend our precious funds. Under this new organisation we have with our 4 pillars, as we call them, we can now manage the whole estate as a portfolio. Previously, we had to run each site virtually under its own specific budget, and it was frankly impossible to move funding around. That really does help us and has done for the last couple of years, and I think we're going to have to do more of that going forward, given the state of the nation's finances.
Okay. And how much pressure do you get from the government on reducing spending, and how much in the way of efficiency savings have you made in recent times?
So we work hand in glove with our department. There's a very capable sponsor team dedicated to working with us in our department. Treasury as well have a dedicated team to nuclear across government, and we meet regularly with those at least once a month. I have a weekly meeting with counterparts in the department. We have a plan now to see how we can improve our so-called back office spend and direct more activity to the front line. We're aiming for a 5% per annum improvement over the next period, and already begun work on that in anticipation of further pressure from Treasury in phase 2 of the spending round.
Thank you very much. Claire Young, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the current strategy document, which is due to be replaced next year, outlines the plan for current fuel types. So will you need to create new processes or facilities for newer reactors, such as the small modular reactors?
Very good question. We don't believe we will. There'll be different fuel types, and storage of their fuel for a period will be on those specific sites. Pleased to say at Euan's site at Sellafield, we have just again this year introduced something called a 63 can rack, which again does what it says on the tin. It's a rack that can hold 63 cans, which is a much more densely packed. So it will avoid us having to build new facilities for storage, particularly for the fuel for the future reactors. And then of course we have the capability to build new storage over the next decades. I mean, it is interesting, when I took on this job a few years ago, we were very much in decline, albeit over 100 years, because the nuclear sector was actually in decline. Now it's really flipped on its head, and we're actually a growth business now for decommissioning. The AGRs, the EDF will come over to us in due course, starting with Hunterston in 2026. So that by the end of this decade, we'll have added a huge amount of work, and then we will be involved ultimately in supporting the SMR agenda in its post-production world. We'll offer different challenges though, because I guess there'll be multiple sites rather than big, sort of monolithic gigawatt scale reactors.
So the challenge is coming from the nature of the sites rather than the material.
That's right, but we're confident we've got enough capacity for continuing with the AGR refuelling and the defueling with the work we've done.
What about waste from fusion reactors if and when they come online?
Interestingly, waste from fusion may have very different characteristics, and potentially it will be nowhere near as hazardous as the products from fission reactors, which of course brings with it quite a lot of really nasty stuff.
So you don't see any different approach needed? Well, it sounds like maybe it will need a different approach. It won't need such.
It will need a different approach, but maybe not quite the skills that we have developed over the last 80 years. So I think in a good way, I think the risk associated with fusion waste will be less. There's always the GDF, of course, where ultimately the high-level waste will find its way. And if there is high-level waste from fusion, that's where that would go to.
And you talked earlier about your £1 billion income. Does the money from EDF to take oxide waste actually cover the costs of storing and disposing those waste?
Yes, it does. If I understand the question, yes. But it certainly covers the costs of defueling and refueling, and it's a lucrative arrangement for the UK that EDF pay us for every year.
Is there scope for there to be a more lucrative arrangement?
It's been a long-standing contract. I think we can always examine if it can be improved. We think it's fair at the moment for both sides. It's run for many years, and we do have a good relationship with EDF. It is a symbiotic one. It's our trains, for instance, that move the material from the EDF sites to Sellafield, and I think it's a fair arrangement for the time being.
You were talking before about the opportunities of new nuclear. Do you see them as a chance to extend the life of fuels?
To some extent. So Hinkley C, for instance, which is a different type of reactor to the advanced gas core reactors, will have a higher burn rate, so it'd be more efficient use of fuel at Hinkley C, and Sizewell C as well if it goes ahead. But the big change will become in redesigning and thinking of different types of fuel. And I think that's where the SMRs has real potential for different types of fuel, which have yet to been, whilst they're in concept in many places, they've yet to be used in anger. and there's a real opportunity there.
Okay. Bradley Thomas.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to understand a little bit about the thinking and approach towards plutonium. So understand that a decision is to be taken fairly soon. And given that this could be used in small advanced nuclear reactors, why dispose of rather than put to an alternate use?
So this 140 tonnes of plutonium held at Sellafield very safely and securely is probably the most hazardous material in the UK. Said earlier, we're very confident we're looking after it well, and there is an imminent decision under this government to really decide whether to put the plutonium beyond reach or whether to contemplate its reuse. It's currently in a form that's not that ready to be used in reuse. So either way, we have to adjust it, we have to do things with it physically and chemically to put it either beyond reach or, in theory, reuse. I think our technical team's view is that to get it in a shape where you could reuse it, the security implications of the material, where it could end up, especially if you have dispersed sites around the UK where different SMRs, suggests that they should be using more conventional fuels, i.e. a uranium-based fuel, which has been used for many decades. So people do speculate, rightly so, about, well, you know, why isn't this more of an asset than a liability? But I think our considered view is that the right thing to do is to put the plutonium beyond use, and that itself will take some time with the skills at Sellafield.
And therefore, given the risks that you describe and outline, do you think, you know, the sort of, call it relative imminence of the decision is the right one rather than to delay?
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Vera.
The question has nearly been answered. I did have a meeting with a company called Nucleo, and their Nucleo Advanced Modular Reactor, and they also want to know what is the strategic rationale for prioritizing the long-term storage rather than exploring more whether it can be reused. And you've just explained that. But are you in conversation with these companies that are really exploring new technologies?
Indeed, we are. Yeah. So. Obviously, we support Great British Nuclear in its the work it's doing to develop the SMR programme and potentially beyond that AMRs. But indeed, we're also, the nuclear sector is quite a small family, and we do meet with all of these smaller companies, whether they're US-based like X-Energy, or indeed the Nucleo, the Italian one. Which, but we do think we've got the right judgment on behalf of the UK in how we handle this material.
Yeah. Josh McAllister.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Just, David, on this plutonium question, the opportunities, I guess, for R&D programmes that could be exploited without necessarily changing a plutonium decision for the next few decades that was for putting it beyond use. And I'm thinking particularly about americium, and the opportunities there. Do you think there's a way of keeping enough of the door open for UK leading research and development in some of those spaces for a few more decades before every bit of it is put beyond use?
You make a great point, Josh. National Nuclear Lab, which is the UK's really powerhouse of R&D in this area, situated on the Sellafield site. It's a little enclave. It's a separate body reporting also into DESNZ. But world leading, you know, americium, space batteries. We've had plutonium in space batteries out in outer space, for instance, because it will run for quite a lot. It's a different isotope than the ones that we're carrying. But yes, the short answer is yes, Josh. We can and should continue to lead internationally on that and retain sufficient material. And again, you don't need much of this stuff to carry out that important R&D work. And NNL is very well protected. It has its own separate armed security around its building, in addition to the armed security around Sellafield.
you would have gone to community benefit now.
Carried on anyway. Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. And I should say I'm an officer of the Nuclear Energy APPG as well for just for registering. Great, and welcome to the NDA family group for coming to the committee. And I think this is an often overlooked but really critical part of the work of the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. So I think it's very welcome that we're able to kind of get into some of the detail on this. Appreciating the remit for the NDA is squarely on decommissioning. I do have a question about, with the incredible assets that you've got, particularly in the workforce, the world-leading skills that you mentioned that we definitely have in West Cumbria, and some of the adjacent fields in research and development, and I guess the history of UKAEA and the original civil programme and where we've got to now, having had a few dormant years of new nuclear. Do you think that the NDA remit is for the future right in being so focused on decommissioning, and I'm asking you to kind of think forward here, the three of you, do you think there's opportunity to widen out into wider nuclear development, not taking on the role of GBN, not building new nuclear power plants, but having a remit that recognises that those assets could be put to wider use as well?
Yeah, and again, as I said earlier, whilst we were originally in decline as a business, I think part of our growth agenda is to play a broader role across the sector. I know our department, our sponsor, quite right, and the Treasury particularly, very keen we stick to our core mission of decommissioning the 17 sites. But increasingly we are broadening. We used to be demonstrably neutral on our view on new nuclear. I'm pleased to say we've shifted that position now, and we are publicly in support of new nuclear under this government's agenda around energy security and net zero. And of course we've supported Great British Nuclear. We seconded 19 people, including the Chief Executive, Euan. And I think those kind of soft influences are the best way we can encourage.
Would you be interested in harder forms of influence or role?
Well, we've got enough on our plate right now, especially with the AGRs coming on before 2030. That's another 7 stations to think about. The Vulcan station, which was the MOD's submarine test bed up adjacent to Dounreay in Scotland, the plan there is for that to transfer across to us. We're growing our transport business. We've just won the contract with Tesco for moving their material up the west coast. Believe it or not, it's one of our trains that will be pulling that. So we are kind of stepping out within our area, and I think continuing with that softer style is.
Do you think you've got it right?
I'd never say we've got it right. I think we're making steps to try and improve every day. I'm always happy to listen, and ultimately, look, we're part of government. We are public servants, and we'll follow the steer of our department.
I guess it's a linked point really on land, because the NDA have got a number of sites and bits of land that are not currently being used for operational purposes. So land at Chapel Cross, Sellafield, which I'm obviously very aware of, we've had lots of conversations about over the months, and Harwell as well. Are you making full use of the growth potential of the land that you hold, and are there particular sites that you've got where you think in the near future you could be making greater use?
I think that's also a good question, and one that's really current for us right now. At Chapel Cross, we're about to engage with the local community to build a solar farm there. Chapel Cross is in Dumfries and Galloway, south of Scotland. We have a hydro scheme in Snowdonia called Mine Turog, a wonderful piece of hydroelectric, truly green energy that's been generating for 100 years. And Harwell, we've already released some land, and indeed in Dorset, a site called Winfrith, we've released some land to heathland. I think you're absolutely right, though. There's more we can do to enable and encourage all sorts of energy park type activity on our land, whether that's in Scotland, Wales, or England.
Yeah. What's the barrier to doing more on that, do you think?
Well, I think we tend to need partners wherever we do this. So whether this is public sector partners like GBN, where we've been close to them around Wilver and Anglesey and at Oldbury, where they've obviously bought some extra land. If it's not a public sector partner, then thinking about a local community, as we are in Dumfries, or indeed ultimate, which we haven't yet done, is a pure private sector play, if I can call it that, with people interested, say, in hydrogen or even direct SMR generation. So I think there's more to come on that. And as the nuclear sector does grow and continue in all its forms around the world, we should feel that we're part of that. We do, after all, have the land, as you rightly say, owned on behalf of the taxpayer, which has already been licensed for nuclear activity, largely, and a load of land beyond that, which... So I think, again, the short answer is I don't think we are using it all to the best efficiency, but we're very open to keep working on that.
Right. The final question was on the freedom and flexibility of procurement processes, given your role as a government arm's length body, and whether you have the range of freedoms that you would want in order to back the supply chain and particular communities in the UK in the way that, for example, EDF might be able to?
Yeah, so we are more constrained, rightly, under public sector rules. I mean, it does force transparency, which I think is a good thing. That drives competition, and it's just part of our overall the package we have to work with as we go forward. I mean, we do benefit from being government owned, that the supply chain will see as a good customer, ultimately with the government behind us. I mean, and that can help.
I would argue EDF are seen in those terms as well, transparent and probably a good buyer. I don't know. There may be people watching this who've got very different views on that, but I imagine they would be seen in that light, and yet they've got a bit more freedom. Would you? I appreciate you're operating within the rules that you're operating within. Could you see the benefits of greater freedoms if the NDA were able to operate like EDF or BAE Systems or others?
Yeah, there might be, but I think I think we're always going to be constrained by the requirements of public sector expenditure, rules around Treasury, and the new rules that are coming on procurement. Yeah, we've been able to work within them. They can add time to the overall processes. But
I mean, the NAO report shows they had lots of time to work at Sellafield, so they're not. I speak for myself. I don't think they're fit for purpose in making speedy decisions. I think probably lots of people in government would share that view as well. So, just really appreciate your operating within the mandate that you've got, but views and opinions you might have about its limitations.
Yeah, there are limitations with any structures. I think there's more we can do internally as well in improving our own processes for approvals. Things can take far too long with the number of layers of approval, and we are looking into that. That was a conclusion of the NAO report, which we've taken very seriously.
Thank you very much. Very next, Claire Young, back to you.
Yep, and I should have declared an interest as a member of the Nuclear APPG as well. I think you've already partly answered the question, but is there anything you'd like to add about whether the new reactors being built, particularly small modular, whether they will use the same materials as legacy sites, or if there's anything notably new?
I think the two things that will be notably new are a better burn-up rate, so a more efficient use of the fuel. We're already seeing improvements in that, including with the new reactors at Hinkley C and potentially Sizewell C. So that's the first thing. In other words, and implicit in that is less spent fuel, less waste, which is good. And things can operate at higher temperatures. That makes things more efficient and makes potentially AMRs available at sites where you need not just electricity from a turbine, but also heat to directly use. And then the second area it's going to be different is in this multiple deployment. I mean, obviously the beauty of a small modular reactor is that you can design one and build many and then deploy them at multiple sites. It's not yet clear, and there'll be work to be done with our regulator, the ONR, to think about how those are fuelled at the start of their lives, and then how they are refuelled during their productive life. And I think that will offer some challenges and opportunities for the sector as it thinks about that. Because previously, for the last 70 years, we've had very few big sites generating essentially gigawatts of power from the Magnox stations and now the AGR stations, with a few of our trains able to move the material backwards and forwards as needed. We're going to move to a much more dispersed model of refueling and defueling. With the improved efficiency, though, of the fuel, of course, that frequency should also potentially reduce. And there may be some reactors that can run for a very long time without the need for any refueling, potentially for the whole of its life. But we're not there yet. But I do think fuel. I'd also, and I think it's post the war in Ukraine, important that we have a UK capability of making nuclear fuel. And I'm pleased that this government has been very supportive of the work we're doing at Springfields, near Preston, and developing the other potential fuels from uranium.
So on the one hand, you have much more efficient use of fuel and therefore a smaller amount of waste. But on the other, if Nisa's right about the large contribution that nuclear is expected to make to UK energy generation, there's going to be much more of it. So how does that, when you balance those two things up, how does the volume compare to what you currently hold? And what is your estimate of how much more nuclear material will be generated?
I don't actually have an estimate of how much more. It obviously depends on how many gigawatts of new nuclear power we develop. I'm happy to write back with an estimate, Chair, if that would help. It would need, I think, a bit of further analysis on that. But to give the committee some confidence, we have managed here in the UK for 70 years more types of fuel than any other country in the world. More types of reactors have been tested, tried, experimented with at Harwell, at Winfrith, at Dounreay, at Sellafield. And we do have the capacity, and if we don't have it to handle it now, there are the ways where we could make the capacity available as an interim. And as we said always, ultimately, the geological disposal facility is the end point for all of these spent fuels.
To give you an estimate on that, so we've looked at the current geological disposal facility covers all of our legacy waste plus up to 16 gig. If we were to increase that to 24 gig, we estimate about an extra 5% of spent fuel and 5% ILW waste to go to a GDF. That's in comparison to the entire of our legacy waste disposal. So, even increasing by quite a large gigawatt power for many decades to come, the waste itself is not a huge increase from what we're currently managing.
It's really a comment on the history. The legacy is so big that the future won't really add much, and that tells you, I suppose.
And the confidence that the new technologies are so much more efficient, so there's much less waste. Yeah.
That's right. The fuel design, the ability of the reactors to run at a higher temperature, all mitigate for less waste, and designing the reactors in the first place with decommissioning in mind, which didn't occur with the previous generations.
And just to add a little bit to that, it also plays into policy around reprocessing. So all the waste that we're talking about being generated by the new stations, there isn't a policy to reprocess that waste, that spent fuel, sorry. So an awful lot of the volume that we're talking about that's going to go in the GDF is because we in the UK had a policy of reprocessing, which essentially splits the fuel up into constituent parts to reuse the uranium and potentially the plutonium.
We stop that. We don't do any
so we don't do that anymore, and it's not the policy to do that anymore.
Okay, and then finally, have you been working with the companies that are currently bidding for SMR contracts on what materials they will use and produce?
No, simply put. I think I mentioned in an earlier answer, We've had some light touch contact, particularly with some of the smaller SMR companies, those interested in some of our material for their fuel, but we're not in touch with the current list of SMR bidders.
Can I add from a waste point of view? So when the SMR designs get to a generic design assessment point, we will provide information and analysis of the waste that would be formed from those reactors. But that's when they're far further down the line. So the top leaders, if you like. We are aware that some of the fuels will offer new types of waste forms, and we're working with the international waste community, certainly in Canada as well, where they've got quite a forward-leading SMR programme to share what the implications of some of those waste forms could be in the future.
Given there are, very quickly, because I said it was finally, didn't I? Given there are at least 2 different SMR notably different SMR technologies coming forward, you're not expecting to feed in your views, because there's a decision-making process going on about which technologies are adopted.
So our support comes when they are through to the next phase and part of the generic design assessment. It's part of the licensing that we would provide advice on waste management, yes.
Right. We will provide advice to GBN and the regulator at that point.
Thank you. Julie Minns.
Thank you very much, Chair. We started by alluding to, some of those perceptions that still persist around nuclear waste, etc. Are we getting better at minimising it? I think you've touched on this already, but perhaps I could just invite you to explain a little bit more to the committee about that journey and how we've come to minimise the amount of waste now.
Yeah. Do you want to?
Yeah. So, as I kind of alluded to, I don't think it's almost not an apples for apples comparison between the nuclear waste that we refer to as the legacy and nuclear waste that will be generated through new nuclear, and that's fundamentally because, as David talked about earlier, the missions that the organisations delivered through the decades from 1947 were very specific. So the original phase at Sellafield, for example, was all around the development of the weapons programme, and there was a very small amount of the material was required for that. So the other byproducts of fission, or indeed the cladding around the fuel, was left for later. Part of my organisation, a big chunk of my organisation, I would call as We Are Later. So we are dealing with that very effectively. We need to do it more efficiently, very safely today. So going forward, it's not just that the technology in terms of the efficiency and the power output of the reactor and the quality of the fuel, it's the purpose of the new generation is to generate electricity. That's fundamental. So all of the other things are absolutely minimised. The work that we do today around building with decommissioning in mind means that when we get to the end, we don't have to then work out what to do. Part of the thing that we do at Sellafield all the time, and I would really welcome any of you to come for a visit. I know some of you have already been, but you'll see some of the challenges that we have is we're starting from a point where we have to work out what the next step is. The new generation, that's right in at the design stage, so you can manage the fuel, you can minimise the amount of fuel, and then you can manage the decommissioning in a much more efficacious manner.
Yeah, if I can come in there. So if we look at some of the volumes of waste that we have in the UK, so you're right, we've got one of the largest volumes of higher activity waste, which includes intermediate and high level waste, about 750,000 cubic metres. That's all destined for a GDF. The recent policy change does allow some of the lower hazard of that waste volume to go into a near-surface disposal facility. That's really important because that means we can save the really higher activity stuff to go in the most high-cost facility and really save the volume of that for future generations and many, many decades to come. If we look at the lower end of the waste volumes, we have about 4 million cubic metres of lower activity waste. We were disposing that at the low-level waste repository, for 70 years. About 15 years ago, we looked at what we could do with that waste to make it better, to treat, to disperse, and to better dispose of it in more suitable facilities. And we now divert 98% to low-level waste from the repository, which is a real asset for the UK and enables not just decommissioning, but medical operations, defence programmes. We now divert 98%, which means we've extended the life of that facility by over 100 years, saving about £900 million so far in taxpayers' money. So, huge innovation at the lower end. And now what we're trying to do with this new policy that allows us to take a risk-based approach is take that innovation up the categorisation of waste so that we're protecting all of the disposal facilities we have in the UK, as I said, for many, many decades to come.
That's really, really helpful. I mean, I know we're talking there about the low-level waste, but are there lessons learned there in terms of the efficiencies you've managed to drive at the low-level waste repository that are now being disseminated across the NDA group?
Yeah, there absolutely are, and we work collectively as a group when we look at waste management, as well as with the defence sector and medical sectors. So it's really around how we categorise our waste, how we sentence our waste, how we package it, and treatment options that are available. So we use the waste hierarchy to really make sure that we're only disposing of that waste that we absolutely have to. So looking at recycling, decontamination, and all of the sites work together to do this in a really cost-effective way.
It's one of the big benefits of the one NDA model and taking the previous model out, because we all work very collectively. There's the integrated waste management programme we're working on, so that any waste that we have to create at Sellafield, we're hand in glove with nuclear waste services.
You touched very briefly on GDF, so if I may, I'll just ask a couple of questions around that. What's your current confidence level that you're going to find a willing community to be able to take to Secretary of State, I think, for deep borehole end of next year, this time next year? Are we still on track for that? But give us an idea about your confidence level at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me give you an update as to where we are. So the policy was established in 2018, 2019. So over the last 5 years, we've had a volunteer-led community approach to find a willing community. And over the same 5-year period, we've been assessing the site to be suitable from a geological point of view. So we need a willing community and a suitable site. We've had 5 communities engaged in the process. We currently have 3, 2 in Cumbria, Mid and South Copeland, and 1 on the East Coast in East Lindsey. All 3 of those communities are confidently within the process. There are different challenges within each community from a geological or community support point of view, but we're confident that we'll be able to make a recommendation to the Secretary of State next year to take 1 or more of those communities through to boreholes. We're already preparing the procurement and the supply chain to support us in preparing for the permissioning required, because we do require a DCO for each of those sets of boreholes that we want to dig, yes.
And just so, because I think Mr. Hutton mentioned legacy defence sector waste, which obviously you'll manage at the moment, is the intention that future defence sector waste will also be destined for the GDF?
Yes, and that's the great thing about the UK. Actually, we have one waste organisation that deals with all radioactive waste in the UK, and that in itself is world leading. Mm-hmm.
And does that include submarine manufacture in the UK that isn't destined for use in the UK? Talking about the AUKUS programme in particular.
You mean the waste streams from the AUKUS programme? I'm not confident that decision has been made. It's certainly not one that I'm aware of.
Yeah. I don't think that's been thought through fully.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry to divert you on that one. We had, when the NEO were here, a cost for the GDF programme presented to us of, I think, 20 billion. I'm just looking. 20.3 billion, which I think reflects a cost that was given in 2022. But I know NWS's report, I think for this year, estimates the cost of between 20 and 53 billion.
Yeah, so let me try and explain.
I suppose, have NEO got that wrong, or have they just been given the wrong figure?
No, the numbers are absolutely consistent. The 20 to 50 billion is the total life cost, full operation for 150 years and final closure. The 20 to 50 is to take account of the uncertainty within that programme. So the point figure of the 20 billion is still a consistent figure with the build phase of the programme. We currently estimate about 12 billion to first waste and placement date, but because of how we estimate the risks and uncertainties with these long-scale programmes, that's why you get the large range there. That was set out in our business case in, I believe, 2019-2020, which covers the entire programme cost.
Okay, I think the reason why it sort of raised our eyebrows slightly was that seemed, even for a build cost, quite low, and I believe it is a 2022 cost. We are all very familiar as to what's happened with inflation over the last 2 years. So, are you absolutely certain that NEO report build cost is accurate?
If it's a 2022 cost, I'd have to clarify what inflation has been built into that. Yeah, because some of the numbers within the business case are based on 2017 figures, uninflated. Yes, but when we look in the round with the bounding numbers, that does take account of inflation over the periods. Yes.
I think it might be just helpful to come back, because we did raise the question with the NEO when they were in front of us. Because we had a little question mark, it seemed a little bit on the low side, and if it is, as I've seen, a 2022 cost, that is still being reflected in an NEO report, I think it's just something that might need updated.
There might be a point of clarification around the NDA proportion of the cost as well, so we'll check and give you absolute fact and figure. Yes.
We'll come back to you on that.
That's very helpful, thank you.
No more questions.
Great. Cost. Holly Billington, please.
Thank you, Chair. Could you explain a little bit to those of us who are not as familiar with the nuclear decommissioning process as you are, as how it is, how the decommissioning of nuclear sites is paid for?
How the nuclear
decommissioning of nuclear sites, how is it paid for?
How is it paid for?
Yeah.
Well, through the department, we get an annual grant funding. And we use our income from the contracts with EDF and Network Rail to supplement the grant. And that allows us to spend around £4 billion a year across our 17 sites. And then it is then deployed through me as accounting officer for the whole group to the chief executives, and each of the 4 pillars has an operating company in board of directors. They oversee the dispersal, and then we have, obviously, processes and procedures for tracking the spend through the year with quarterly reviews and normal financial controls. It's audited every year by a financial audit now, not a VFM audit, every year by the NAO, and we bring in auditors to do special bits of work as needed. So I hope that answers the question. So it's largely taxpayers' money, our money. Together with the really good revenues we earn from our commercial activities, and then it's deployed through this structure that we have and managed very carefully.
Thank you. And will smaller, more modular nuclear generation make it more difficult and therefore potentially more costly to decommission?
It shouldn't. As we said earlier, the plans for decommissioning the SMRs as part of the generic design assessment will already be built into the design, and to the extent there's standardisation of the SMRs, once we know how to decommission one, we should be able to apply that quickly to the other ones. Although there will be a variety of designs of SMRs, we get that. But what there won't be is the ignorance that we had with the historic gigawatt scale reactors that did not have decommissioning in mind when they were designed and built. So it should be easier going forward, and therefore cheaper and quicker.
And just to, sorry, Polly, just to go back to something you said earlier, you will be involved in the next stage of the bidding process, so that your advice is included in design for decommissioning.
Yes, it's part of the ONR's and Great British Nuclear's next longest step is to seek advice on the cost of decommissioning, and one of the duties of the NDA is to provide our department with advice on decommissioning reactors.
You said it might be cheaper or quicker. How much of that is optimism bias?
Can I give a tiny wee example, hopefully, just to give you a kind of... So if you take on Sellafield some of the old facilities, big chemical plants, getting the last bit out of the bottom of a tank was never thought about. So we have to work out how to get it out, and it'll cost us a lot of money and whatever else. On the new facilities built at Sellafield, we make sure we can get every bit out the bottom as part of the design, so we can clean it out much more effectively, decontaminate it, have less waste that will have to go into some of the waste streams that Corhyn's talked about, but also crucially it's an easier activity that we can undertake, so we can do it less remotely and therefore get on with it much more quickly. And I try not to be too specific, but sometimes when we say we think about it and it'll be better in the future, it's easier to explain the sort of thing that we put in now to make it better in the future.
Okay, thank you. Another significant differences in the cost of decommissioning between the various SMR technologies. Are there significant differences?
I think it's too early to say, actually, until we've seen them develop and actually understand precisely how big they are. I mean, SMRs does cover quite a range of power output, from 50 megawatts right up to half a gigawatt. So that's a big range. SMRs are not that S, actually. So,
and is the government taking evidence from you on the technology to back?
On the technology?
Which technologies to back when it comes to developing SMRs?
Not specifically, no. Only.
Do you think they should?
Well, our advice should be, I think, on our area of expertise, which is around decommissioning. I do commend the department for setting up the Science and Technology Advisory Council, just announced in the last week or so, that Paul Monks is establishing. I think that's a really excellent thing for the department to draw in science, engineering, technical experts to give the department advice, and that might be a place to seek that type of advice.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Luke Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for coming in. So the NDA is the biggest line item on the DESNZ budget, and Sellafield is the biggest line item on the NDA budget. Could you just say a bit about why the Sellafield site is so expensive and so difficult to manage?
Yes, I can. So, and again, I referenced £105 billion. I know an eye-watering figure, which is the total provision in our accounts for the next 120 years. Of that 105 billion, 75% roughly relates to Sellafield. And of that Sellafield amount, a further 75 relates to the legacy, so the history. And I think, whenever I visit, I always remind myself that we're probably now paying for the cost of keeping the country safe during the Cold War, frankly. The context at the time, the way the reactors were run, the way the waste and the spent fuel was handled, frankly, it was left for another day. And as Euan said earlier, now is that other day. So if you do the maths, obviously about half of the total spend is about the legacy. The other reason it's very difficult, as well as the way the plans were created, is that Sellafield is a very congested site. You're very welcome to visit any time that we can arrange a visit for you. And you will see how we have multiple operations on the site. It's a very small site compared to, say, the United States, a place called Hanford over in the northwest, which is massive in comparison. So it's congested. That doesn't help. And as I said earlier, it's very hard for us to surprise on the upside at Sellafield. We're always finding problems that we hadn't foreseen, and I think the team do a fantastic job there. But it's dealing with the legacy, it's helping keep the lights on, and it's in a very, very congested space, which we're thinking about, and how we can use land adjacent to it for other activities.
Just to add that, it's that it goes back to some of the questions on sort of the new fleet of reactors, it wasn't thought of how to do this bit when this bit was created. And something as simple as how do you demolish a chimney, an old stack. We'll have to take it down chunk by chunk because of its location. Whereas if you're an old chemical facility that's at the end of its life and it's been decommissioned, you'll quite often see explosive demolition used to reduce facilities. We have used explosive demolition. We did it in 2007 to take down the cooling towers on Calder, but it's not something we can go to too frequently. So we have to, and if you do come to the site, you'll see we're taking down the kind of iconic chimney that was on one of the original piles. The filter gallery on the top that people will refer to as Cockcroft's Folly, we took that down in 7-ton chunks, and it took us about 18 months to take 300 tons off the top of that. And it's those kind of things, when you see it, you can understand that the challenges of location, as in how it's all built and the way it was kind of created in the space available, on the challenges to do with the material itself, its radiotoxicity, its chemical toxicity. It was built at a time when asbestos was freely used as a material in construction and insulation, etc. So we've got a whole myriad of things that we have to manage in order to then deliver the solution. Now, when it comes to the solution itself and the major projects that we talked about earlier and that simple metric on success, unlike the SMRs, which we all hope will be, build one, repeat it, and you can get a few, most of the things, other than stores, that we do on the Sellafield site are first of a kind, one of a kind. So inevitably there's a big sense of experimentation in terms of delivering those, and with that comes uncertainty.
I hear what you're saying about the kind of historic, like the lack of thought that maybe went into it sort of 50 years ago, but I guess the NEO highlighted that Sellafield's missed the majority of, or most of its important hazard reduction targets since 2020, 2021. And some of the key milestones for emptying the legacy ponds, which I think you've mentioned, have slipped by up to 13 years since 2018 now. Those are obviously recent metrics and targets and dates that were set, and not something that's liable to sort of... So I guess just to kind of push you on that and why you think those delays are happening, and obviously that is having not just financial consequences, which I think have already been discussed, but also significant safety concerns. Many described as intolerable risks by the department. I guess the other question is it sensible that the NDA puts Sellafield at the centre of its nuclear management plans, given these complexities and delays?
So, again, great set of questions. The targets we set for removal of material from the legacy ponds and silos are, again, set by the teams, largely self-assessed and challenged by management and some of my team. And then along comes a failed crane, for instance, at the Magnox Wharf storage, which can set us back by several months, because these are gantry cranes sitting at the top of a very hazardous building, and then everything has to stop as we repair a crane. And again, the idea that this crane was going to fail was not forecast. Then we've had different issues with robotics in other parts. So I think it's a long way of saying unforeseen problems have led to us not achieving, as the NAO rightly says, not achieving the rate of cleanup that we originally had hoped for. That said, this stuff is really, really hazardous. So the asymmetry of risk and reward, in other words, getting this wrong because we're chasing a target is absolutely the wrong thing to do. There's potentially catastrophic events could occur if we get things wrong. So we're naturally and understandably, I hope, really, really cautious on the most difficult parts of the site. Before
you carry on, Luke,
I'd just like to follow up on this. I find this quite odd that we're talking about being super cautious about the risks, and yet unforeseen things, you're calling them unforeseen. I mean, even with a comparatively low risk project, one would have a contingency thing in the budget. Now, your contingency might have to be larger because you have higher risks. But would you say that perhaps the lack of that contingency being sufficiently large is part of your optimism bias?
I think that's a fair comment, yeah. I think.
So what you can do about it?
Well, we've got to get the balance right. We can't just keep adding contingency. Then we have, original estimates which, become...
Forgive me, at the moment, as I understand it, your estimates are over-optimistic and the results of the actual costs exceed those estimates. So that sounds to me like that's not a very good plan.
Except the more recent capital projects at Sellafield, and some of them mentioned in the NAO, not the value for money report on Sellafield, but on the department's report, you'll see that 2 of the projects at Sellafield are actually marked green and are doing okay. So we're not bad across the board, but I don't disagree with your broader point where I think we're still seeing optimism bias. What are we doing about it? Well, we're doing more reference class forecasting, more sharing across the group, and not allowing teams just to develop their own estimate unchallenged, and encouraging them to build in further continue. And there's more I'll be the first to say there's more for us to do on that.
For clarity for the record, I'm a pro-nuclear person. I'm a member of the GMB. Which is also an important thing in terms of declarations of interest. I am just struck by the fact that, costs and contingencies should be factored in, especially when you're dealing with these high levels of risk. And people who are somewhat more sceptical about this industry than I am might say, why does the government continue to throw money at something where you're continually getting your estimates of costs wrong, significantly wrong?
I absolutely take that. I think that's a fair comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Murphy.
Can I just sort of add to that? Are you ultimately worried that the government or anybody would become lukewarm about further nuclear if you disclose the range of costs up to the possibly highest cost rather than doing that optimism bias? I'm not personally worried about it for 2 reasons. I think the world does need nuclear now as part of the solution to climate change and energy security. And to repeat the point I made earlier, the bulk of our costs and the bulk of our issues are to do with the legacy of the last 70 years. And looking forward, our capital projects are already improving. And as we said, the new design reactors will have decommissioning built in and should have a much tighter envelope of cost. And I think we are trying to address the optimism bias point. More to do on that.
Good.
Luke Murphy.
So you asked the question, and can I just give a little sense of balance? Yeah. So yes, you're right. In the legacy ponds and silos area, one of the most challenging areas to work in. We aren't where we need to be. The team in there, when you meet them, you'll find a team who are so motivated by the challenge that they're given. But if you go across the site to 2 of the other big sort of programmes of work that we're delivering, one is on the receipt of all the AGR. For the last 2 years now, we have been receiving everything from the AGR fleet, dismantling and then storing it, getting it ready to store in the storage facility until the GDF's available. And also on the special nuclear material side of things, we through the regulator, they identify the most important things to them in a regulatory issue, of which there are 4 levels, level 1 being the highest priority. In the last couple of years, we've cleared 2 level 1 regulatory issues to do with that material, and we've done that in a repurposed, so value for money facility that we've delivered with the teams doing it. Sometimes it's taking the opportunity to remember that it's not just about the things that don't go very well, and as we said earlier, we don't come here very often to tell you about the things that we are doing well.
Fair point. Can I just ask sort of tangentially about the on-site laboratory, because obviously analytics is crucial, and that was identified as one of the risks by the NAO, the reliance on the 70-year-old site. And there's obviously been problems with the new site that was going to be developed. Could you just tell us a little bit about what the status is?
Yeah, so
of that?
I mean, just Euan can take you through some detail, but we have decided to pause a current project on that because we found a better way under Euan's leadership to deal with the analytics at Sellafield. Yeah,
so about this time last year, we did an inter-programme review. The project that we're talking about, I will talk about programmes and projects. Programmes are longer than projects. We did an inter-programme review because the project wasn't going to deliver what I needed when I needed it to do. Very quickly we decided to pause that project because what the programme review was suggesting was there might be a different way of delivering the output that we needed. We were challenging the requirements, the timescales, etc. And a fundamental piece of the puzzle, and I think you just alluded to it there, is that the current facility is one of the first facilities that was built on the site, and we were trying to replace it. Well, interestingly enough, the work that we need to do to keep the old facility going for long enough for a replacement requires a significant investment in that facility, which actually afforded me different options of what to do next. In terms of my confidence in that, every engineering assessment that we do hasn't identified anything that causes me real worry. We've done a lot to replace the electrics, the roof, ventilation, and actually fundamentally, and I was really pleased by this, the attitude in the staff in the old facility has just gone through the roof because they can see us investing in the facility with all the care and attention that we need, effectively because we're not getting a new one, we're absolutely looking after the old one. Now, we are currently preparing to come through to the Desnes pick. I think it's going to be just after Easter. We have made the decision that we will, which we need to govern, so we've made the decision internally. There's governance steps to go through to confirm that decision. But we believe that that decision will deliver the alternative that I need to deliver the programmes of work that we've got, and it is more than likely that that will be available 4 years earlier than the project was, and also within the range of the original outline business case, which plays into a saving of somewhere between probably £500 million. So
is this proposal sort of assessed by the NAO, or is this subsequent to their report?
So we hadn't. The NAO did their field work in the summer.
Yeah, when it was.
It's through the autumn that we've completed our work, and we now have where we're going to get to.
And final question: given all the discussion about value for money and kind of performance metrics, how does the NDA and I guess Sellafield specifically measure productivity, and what are the hard metrics for whether this is improving or declining?
Yeah, so we use a number of metrics, as you can imagine. The first one is around hazard reduction. So we have milestones for removing waste, and as we heard, we're not achieving all of those as best as we can. We carry financial metrics as well. So the costs around our sites, tracking those, and benchmarking across the estate. And then we have our human measures as well around diversity and inclusion metrics. We have regular surveys of our staff, which I think is an increasingly important part of our cultural improvement. And we track those monthly in our monthly report, and then quarterly reviews that the NDA holds with the 4 operating companies. And then we meet quarterly with the department and UKGI, and then annually with our sponsor department.
One very brief question. Following the NA report, there was lots of kind of reporting around tensions with the Treasury, and discussions around the wider fiscal environment. If you ever thought your fiscal settlement was compromising the safety, which is fundamental obviously to your operation, would you feel able to raise the alarm in public around that?
Ultimately, yes, it was the public word that we certainly would raise it with our regulator and with our sponsor department, and that would be our prime vehicle for communicating our concerns. I think we're always careful about making public statements. We are an arm's length body of the government, and it's for the government to make public statements.
Thanks.
You've told us a lot about your constraint on the site, the challenges you face, equipment going wrong, rewiring the site, and then you compared the much bigger facilities in the United States. Should you be considering an alternative to Sellafield?
Well, I think we kind of have Sellafield, so we must deal with what we have there. And I say there are lots of successes. So, and interestingly, colleagues from the United States, Canada, Japan, are always incredibly impressed by what we do at Sellafield, and that reputation is unrivaled internationally.
All right. You mentioned the benefits of the SMR program and the fact that you'll get repeat business, and that'll help with your economies of scale. Do you think that is an argument also for the same for new gigawatt capacity for building Sizewell, and indeed more beyond that? Will this help with your decommissioning efficiency?
Yes, I think that's right. To the extent that reactors are standardised, whether they're gigawatt or small, then that does help our job of decommissioning.
Which will help with your value for money, which is the point the NAO are making to you. Yeah, okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Vera Hophouse.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for coming. I don't have anything to declare any interest, and I'm possibly in a minority, if not the only one, who's a little bit more skeptical about nuclear power. But I also recognise that our overarching aim has to be to get to net zero. And I'm a liberal, I'm always persuadable to good arguments. But the costing is, of course, since government can spend money on anything, but not on everything. So it is ultimately about choices. And I wanted to follow up on one thing that was earlier said about new technologies and the range that is out there, and that it is currently too early to sort of put money on any particular technology. But is there any point when you think that actually there could be a benefit in the government backing a particular technology, as I said, because you otherwise ride a lot of horses, and that could also be costly for the taxpayer?
Thank you for the question. So, I mean, 3 quick points, and which are focus of the government. The process GBN is doing on SMRs, I think, is absolutely the right one, and it's got multiple suppliers with different technologies. So taking 1, 2, 3 of those forward is the right thing. Then comes the advanced modular reactors, which could potentially deliver much higher temperature, more efficient reactors, but they're, albeit a decade or so away. And then, of course, perhaps not that far away, and maybe closer than many of us have felt over the last few decades, is nuclear fusion. And if you get the opportunity to visit Culham, where there's some extraordinary work being done there on the development of fusion, I think we as a species, frankly, should be able to take heart that nuclear fusion is more and more possible, even doable within the next. Let's see. I hope I don't want to offer optimism bias at this point.
Thank you. You have already answered one of the questions, and that is whether you think new technology will get done faster and more cheaply. So, Chair, I think that has already come out in the previous set of questions. But can you just sort of characterize the efficiency and effectiveness of the Sellafield site operation? So again, that we understand a little bit more, what you think is particularly effective about it and what is efficient.
Well, thank you very much for that question. So I would couch this in sort of 2 fundamental terms. It's the nature, and I think we've touched on it, around the creation of new capital assets, and our ability to predict more accurately, reference case forecasting as an example, so that we can be more assured in how much it will cost and when I'll have them available to me. So that's one side of it. The other side is actually then the delivery of the operations. Every day, as David mentioned, we safely undertake a number of operations which utilise our resources. We're very keen to make sure that we can do that more efficiently and effectively. COVID, I have to say, provided us with a real challenge because, as you can remember, those days we very quickly had to make the site quiescently safe as people were left at home. So we had to switch off chemical facilities, make it, sorry, when I say quiescently safe, put it into a place where I can look after it very easily. Not move nuclear material around, run chemical processes, etc. Coming out of the other side of that has been a real challenge because, as we said before, it's quite an old facility, and switching it off and leaving it for a while before you switch it back on has been a challenge. Being able to undertake the routine maintenance, we had to, and it was nuclear risk balance decisions on what maintenance we could do during that period, and getting back on and delivering all of that. And that then plays into the point that Luke was making around our ability to deliver what we have to deliver as quickly as we can. And when we talk about a crane failing, you might think we should be able to predict and maintain a crane beforehand. So our focus is on the availability of the asset, the availability of the equipment, so we can operate it more and get on with the task in hand. That's our focus.
We've already talked about how much of this is actually being picked up by the taxpayer, and I understand most of it, but is there eventually a point where it's complete and there will be no more monetary support required?
Well, so the current estimate runs out 120 years for the work we know about now. With new nuclear build, that will add beyond that. And our expectation is that the people who fund and benefit from, I'm thinking companies now, SMRs for instance, would be paying for their decommissioning costs up front through a fund or directly paying it. So I think there is a point when the taxpayer should not have to fund the decommissioning, but we still have to, the legacy clean up from the last 70 years, which is going to last for another century.
Not in my lifetime.
Yeah, it's going to live very long.
Do you think that the way that technology develops means we could have a degree of optimism bias, just to choose a phrase, that we might see the legacy clean-up speeded up? And
yeah, we would hope so. Yeah, absolutely. You know, we're actually using robotics. You might have seen this thing called Spot the Dog. It's typically a yellow quadruped, shape of a dog, obviously. And it's now moved beyond just turning up at conferences and people saying, oh, isn't that cute? It's actually now being used for real in hazardous buildings and doing real clean-up work, and we're keeping people away from harm's way. So, there's real leverage to be had there. We can do laser cutting now. There's something called Laser Snake, which is a very long-armed laser cutting device, which is an extraordinary piece of technology. Again, it keeps humans out of contaminated areas. And is incredibly efficient. It can do work in minutes that could take a human hours, if not days.
But when it then comes, just last one, when it comes to persuading people, let's say, like me, that actually this is a really safe technology and we shouldn't really worry too much about human health and, the risk assessment we have already talked about, don't you have anything that could make that a little bit more transparent? Or you could say, what took us this amount of time in the past, now with a robot or with your laser cutting technology, will take 3-4 years out of that operation?
Sorry, because absolutely. The challenge that you have is, and building on the question asked, is that in a plan that goes out for 100 years, we used to call them innovation insertion points, and that sounds a little bit glib, but it's not. It's that something will happen. A new technology will develop that we can either make an assumption that it will happen and therefore things will reduce in cost and time, or we set a baseline, and this is how we do it, we set a baseline on the assumption of the technology that we have and the techniques will play out for those 100 years. It's very difficult to get in that way of thinking. How do you put those things in? But I'm absolutely certain. I always say to my children, iPhones were invented in 2007 and they think they've existed since, the dawn of man. But but it's very difficult to then, over a 100-year plan, put things in which are assured, if you like, the ability to scrutinise them, because you might be saying in 20 years' time we anticipate this, and I don't know what that is, but I'll absolutely say that those things will happen, which will make it cheaper and bring the end in.
I think I almost heard you say something will come up. It's very seasonal. So for those of you who didn't catch the reference, but Josh McAllister wanted to come in.
Yeah, it was just on this point of innovation insertion points. That I guess there's also a case for saying that you could do some innovation development points as well, right? So back to the point of shaping.
And we do.
We do.
If Sellafield were to make itself a global hub for testing robotics in hazardous environments, for example, could actually spur some of that on.
It would.
Agree with that.
Rather than looking for an alternative to Sellafield, as I might have suggested just now.
Indeed, Chair, yes.
The constituency MP springing to your defence.
I thought you were still out on the answer.
Yeah, he thought I wasn't here. Yeah. So.
Talk of crap.
Thank you, Chair, and Corhyn, David, Euan, thanks for coming in, for your evidence and for your expertise and for keeping us safe, I guess. I've got technical questions on R&D and whether you get value money out of that, but I want to go back to a version of the question the Chair asked you at the beginning about what keeps you awake at night. Does what's happening in Ukraine and to Ukraine's nuclear industry and the pressure on Ukraine to lean more into its nuclear power worry you at all?
Yeah, it does worry me, and the energy security for the world, the impact, and of course the impact on Ukraine and Russia. Actually, I lived and worked in Russia for 5 years and got to know very many good Russians. Actually, it might seem an odd thing to say, but I do fear for both nations and worry about that. In my professional life, we worry about where we're going to help the sector with its sources of fuel, and we touched on that earlier about the need for the UK to have its capability to develop its own fuel and not rely on Russia, and that's a constant care for us. I'm pleased that the department is making steps in that area, so we will have some national capability for fuels.
Okay.
I hope that.
I mean, our plants don't have missiles flying over them every night like Ukraine's do, but we are in almost a cyber war with hostile actors. You mentioned that security and cyber was one of the pillars of the NDA. Have you seen an uptick in cyber attacks in the last couple of years?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, certainly over the last 12 months. I'm personally attacked most days with directed phishing attacks. We have a very strong protective mechanism, but we've got to be incredibly vigilant. We've built a new cyber protection central hub up at Herders House in Josh's constituency, which services the whole of the group, and we're really well plugged into the National Cyber Security Centre as well, because we are part of the national infrastructure for the UK. So it absolutely is a constant care of mine, and it will just take us, a moment of inattention by one of our team to allow a cyber attack to be successful. Obviously, we exercise recovery plans for a cyber attack, but you're right. It remains, an area of the world's warfare, frankly, which is growing and will continue to grow.
Okay, thanks. The technical stuff now. I mean, I'm really interested to hear how, Tesco's use the NDA to deliver stuff to supermarkets and how you make money like that.
Yep.
You spend something like 100 million on R&D each year, and you are at the edge of innovation. Everything you do is the first time it's been done. Are things like Spot the Dog, are they used? I mean, what technologies have come in that you've invented?
I mentioned two earlier, the robotic dogs, the laser snake, which we've supported. We support 150 PhD students around the UK. We obviously have a very strong graduate programme, which we like them to work on new stuff because they've got fresh, open minds. And we work with many of the universities around the UK in developing. We've had an approach where we offer big challenges like keeping humans out of harm's way, with awards to universities to follow up on that. So yeah, I mean, I think 100 million a year is a good investment. It's about the right scale. Arguably, it should be a bit more, but we're confident that we're getting some good, really strong results from that.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what do you get out of that? Do you get patents that you can then sell on?
Yeah, we tend not to get patents, but we do get really practical applications on our site. So obviously, we touched on a couple. We do get great people who come and join us, who want to work with us. This year, we're recruiting 100 graduates, and we've had 11,800 applications. So strong. People do want to come and join the NDA, whether that's for R&D or for the technical work that we're doing.
And do you have to buy in technology and patents from other sites around the world, from other nuclear?
Yes, we do from time to time where we need a specific need. The valves comes to mind. We've used valves at Sellafield of a particular design for hostile service condition, and there are very few manufacturers of that in the world. Sometimes we have to bring in what is intellectual property owned by other companies. Yes.
Mm-hmm. I'm interested also in what Josh alluded to there about Sellafield possibly becoming an innovation centre for robotics in terms of nuclear waste handling.
I think that's absolutely the natural place for it to be. Yeah.
So we've got. I mean, the great thing about Sellafield is we've got all these challenges, and in order to deliver them, we will be creating new opportunities, not necessarily for the NDA to exploit, but for the UK to exploit. The robot dog, for example, the base robot is a Boston Dynamics robot. We use it to deploy either radiological instrumentation or cutting tools or picking things up, or all that kind of great stuff, keeping the individual away from harm. I totally support. It would be great if we just expand that so that if you've got some robots, you come and you utilise them on our site, because we get two things. We get the development of the technology, and hopefully the UK can exploit that, but I also get work done, and getting work done is my primary concern.
Bonus question from Desnes. Desnes have just issued this strategic review of the National Nuclear Lab, which we haven't the time to digest. I don't know if you have either, but I wondered, did you feed into this review?
Yep, absolutely.
And how do you get on with the National Nuclear Lab? What's your relationship like?
So we are a key customer for the lab. We provide much of the analytical requirements that the lab conducts. NNL, the site, as we mentioned earlier, is an enclave within Sellafield. It's a site within a site. And we interact regularly at all levels with NNL exec. I meet Paul Howarth, who's the current chief exec, on a regular basis.
Yeah, because I noticed that the report calls for greater transparency with key stakeholders and for key stakeholders to reciprocate this transparency. Mm-hmm. That seems like a civil service criticism.
Well, I think we can all probably do a better job of more open sharing, and it's good to see that in the report. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Annalise Smidgley.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to refer to my Register of Members' Interests. I'm a member of Unite and the GMB. I want to talk a bit about the workforce and the growth of the nuclear sector. It means that you are looking at facing a shortage of the right people within the right skills. In the introduction, you said that you believed that there were the right skills at Sellafield, and you've just said as well in answer to one of Torquil's questions that you've got 100 graduate places and 11,000 applications. But the Nuclear Skills Delivery Group are also estimating that the sector-wide you need to recruit 40,000 additional workers into the sector, which is double the current recruitment rate, as I understand it. So are you concerned about the demand from other parts of the sector leaving you without the right people and the right skills?
So you're absolutely right, and this is a major concern of mine, this skills agenda. I was on the task force that Simon Bowen was on, along with Sir Simon Bolam, over the last year. And we have the demographics, of course, of an ageing population and people retiring. So you're absolutely right to highlight it's the skills agenda. Corhyn has been personally involved over the last couple of years on our behalf, working not just with apprentices and graduates, but how we, you might have seen the destination nuclear, so we can bring in mid-career people from other sectors, potentially from oil and gas or manufacturing. And then I think we should be more creative about late life employees and how they can stay on part-time or in advisory capacities and be much more flexible in how we treat pensions, and almost drive people, or give people no choice, where the only choice for them is actually to retire. And we're going to lose a huge amount of capability in people who are in their 50s and 60s at the moment. We work very closely with the trade unions. I meet regularly with the national leaders, and they're a really key partner to help develop the skills. But you're right, it's a massive challenge for the sector. I think we do compete with the private sector. We always have to bear that in mind. But I think we have some unique selling points. You know, we're doing work now, today, on our sites, which is really exciting in many areas, whereas some of the private sector work is still some years ahead to come. So you're right, a massive challenge. I don't know if, Corhyn, you want to...
I think the only thing to to add to that is, you know, we find that we're attracting people who are really interested in environmental clean-up and environmental protection. So it is a slightly different sell, if you like, within our part of the sector. But that said, when you look at the numbers of graduates and apprentices coming through, there aren't enough to meet the demands that the skills sector group set out of 40,000 by 2030. So one of the things we're looking at, although we're very site-based, you know, looking at more flexible working around those support areas and support functions. And just in NWS, for example, we now recruit from every corner of the United Kingdom to support our programmes, whereas we didn't do that before COVID. So I think being more flexible will make us more attractive part of the sector, but that unique environmental protection piece and the challenges that you've heard about do help us attract a different set of individuals, like the 11,800 graduates who applied.
Could you just maybe go a bit more into some of the more specific and proactive steps that you are taking to address those risks in terms of that skills shortage, and just want to understand a bit more how it works in terms of the majority of the NDA groups subject to public sector pay spending, and are you buying in stuff from skills from third parties? How does that work? If you could just go a little bit more into
so
that,
we don't do much in terms of third party specialist advice very broadly. Where we have targeted needs, we will bring in specialists. For instance, if we want some work done on forensic accounting, we'll bring one of the big four companies. But that's a transitory piece of work. For me, I come back to the three stages of a person's career, and I think we're doing a really good job at the front end, getting in the 22-year-olds, whether they're apprentices, obviously younger than that for apprentices often, and graduates. And we've got a good program dedicated to them for 2 to 3 years, where they try some different roles and then decide what they wish to pursue their career in. The Destination Nuclear has been a really successful advertising campaign across the sector, actually developed by the Young Generation Network in the nuclear sector, which is a great thing the youngsters did. And then we must hold on to people later on in their careers. And you're right, there are some specific areas around project management, on commercial skills, where I think we can attract good people and compete well with the private sector for key roles. But I don't want to overstate it. It's a massive problem for us, and it's one of the things I do worry about. Yeah.
Thank you, that's helpful. And just looking at the NAO report, it seems like you've had a change in approach in terms of return to the workforce and prioritising the workforce over the last couple of years over the needs of Treasury, budget, commitments. How is that going?
Well, I think we've, working with our trade union colleagues across all of our sites, we particularly had a double down our efforts to reach out and to make sure we've got the community of our workforce with us in the future. It's so important that the workers feel part of the future, and that respect and our approach is both fair and that they can see it. We have a lot of networks now built across the groups, often self-initiated by the workers, by our teams. Obviously, we've got a women's network, we've got LGBT plus network, but we've got a mental health network, we've got a menopause network, we've got men's health networks, and it's sort of been my approach to absolutely encourage those and not some top-down management drive. So allowing those to flourish has been an part. And we've been very open about survey and very willing to hear the criticism and have people tell us the concerns they've got and where we need to improve. And we're getting better engagement scores on that. I've brought in a head of ethics and compliance now across the group, and we're working closely on that to be very open with our channels for things like whistleblowing or raising concerns, and painting all that as a picture of people like to talk about culture change, but I think it's better to look in the details of what we're doing to engage with our staff and listen hard especially when we don't get it right.
Just in terms of the point you were making from the NAO report, we when you look at the demographic of the organisation, there's kind of a significant portion could retire, could take their pension in the next 10 years. So in terms of resilience and making sure we've got suitably qualified and experienced people to undertake all these amazing things that we do, we took the decision to recruit to the point where we could train up before the people left. It seems really straightforward. So at the moment, I think last year we took on over 400 grads and apprentices just into Sellafield. I could give you the number for the whole group. And at the moment, I've got about 1,000 people in recognised training programmes. I had a great session on Monday morning this week where I welcomed 120 degree apprentices. So these are 18-year-olds who haven't gone to university. They're joining the NDA to over 5 years get to a degree qualification, and that was one of those really good days at the office to meet all those young people.
I'm really pleased to hear that you've got a valued and collaborative relationship with the trade unions and the part of working with you in terms of the well-being of the workforce and the workforce in general, but the GMB has also highlighted concerns about the future of the NDA's budget and its impact on Sellafield, the workers and the local community. You've gone into a bit about what you're doing already in terms of steps to safeguard Sellafield's operations and the community and the well-being, but what would you do if the budget were to be cut?
Well, I think we've got a pretty good sense now of what the budget is for next year, and as we said earlier, I think we're confident. It's going to be a very tough year for us next year. This new group structure allows us the benefits of the portfolio. Sellafield is absolutely the area that has the intolerable risks as defined by the regulator. It's where the lion's share of our funding rightly goes, and we'll be protecting that as we go into next year. And now, early in 25, we'll be starting to think about the years beyond the next financial year and the spending there. I think we are going to have to look again at how we're organised, at our back office costs, making sure we improve efficiency and productivity wherever we can, and working very much in partnership with all our trade union colleagues.
And sort of a similar question, I suppose, but in terms of health and safety of your workforce and also of the community, because we've already seen budget cuts leading to workforce reductions and raising concerns and the shutdowns and the operations not going as smoothly as they could. How would the potential reductions impact that in terms of the rigorous health and safety standards?
We're uncompromising on rigorous health and safety standards, absolutely. That is our priority at all our sites, and indeed in all our offices. We start all our meetings with safety moments, and whenever I visit sites and colleagues are the same, this is our priority. I mean, our overall safety record has deteriorated since COVID, and we're absolutely on that. And yet, compared to other industrial sectors, we do perform well by most measures, but it's no reason to be complacent, and we will absolutely keep it as a priority. And then looking forward, obviously with jobs, we absolutely want to avoid any job losses, any impact on employment, and we'll need to see how next year plays out, and then the future spending. But we obviously recognise the pressure on the public purse that all departments face.
Thank you. No more questions.
Thank you very much. You mentioned very briefly the oil and gas industry, where there are 200,000 workers as a potential source of skilled workers for the NDA. Have you made any progress in recruiting?
Yes, we have, but only on a small scale. I do think there's probably a broader approach that could be taken with the oil and gas sector, potentially with the establishment of Great British Energy, based in Aberdeen. For instance, as an engineer from a few decades ago, some universities set up a postgraduate Master of Science degree around petroleum engineering and oil field engineering to, as it were, train engineers who'd studied in electrical or mechanical engineering. They would then do a year that would train them up on oil and gas expertise. Imperial College did it, other universities. I think there's an opportunity for some universities to follow that model and have a 1-year postgrad in a variety of nuclear types of engineering or science to help the transition of the workforce that will be reducing, particularly in the UK North Sea.
Yes, well, you've put your finger on it, talking about the transition. The workforce there is a very, very well-trained workforce, and there are going to be reduced opportunities for them there. So you're confident that there is opportunity in your part of nuclear. One question I ask along those lines. Your sites aren't necessarily where people are working at the moment. Is that how do you address that challenge?
Yeah, that's correct. Our sites tend to be in remote coastal locations, but I absolutely think there is the opportunity to transfer some of the skills from the oil and gas sector. They're used to high hazard, regulated industry, and I think we can do more on that.
Yeah, well, I'd be interested to follow that over the coming months and years with you. And now, turning something else, the BBC reported in 2021 a culture of bullying and harassment at Sellafield. What's been done to address this?
Yeah, quite a lot. It's been a topic of my personal interest over the last few years. I touched on some of the things earlier in the answer to Annalise about listening to the workforce more with regular surveys, and a phrase we use is "you say we did." So we've listened to the feedback and acted on it. The establishment of networks, often self-generated, has been really important. I've put in place a new ethics and compliance function across the whole of the NDA group. We're working on a code of conduct that will play into our organisation, and then ultimately it's about the leadership setting the tone across the group, and then being seen to act when people bring because there's nothing worse than concerns being raised and us not acting on them. And certainly on my watch, we've done everything we can to act on those. It's a very large organisation. We've had pockets at some of our sites of, I think, really, perhaps historic or areas where behaviours need to improve, and we've taken action appropriately when those have occurred. Again, it's more to do on this, but it's a constant drive to get the culture in where the 21st century should expect it to be.
And what evidence do you have that motivation and teamwork has improved since those allegations?
Yeah, it's a question I asked.
It goes to the point about productivity we heard earlier as well, doesn't it?
No, absolutely. And I think the evidence comes from our survey results, how people are feeling about working in our operations, the level of engagement that we've got in those surveys, and just simply how many people fill the form in. That is now at record levels. The evidence of our speak up policy now, which is standard across the group. Previously we had different approaches, different phone numbers, different procedures. It's now a standard approach across all of the NDA. And then we hold each other to account. I hold people who work for me to account in this area. And as I say, I won't go into any specific details, but we have let people go because they've not behaved appropriately, and that will continue in terms of our drive to improve the culture and evidence it, to measure it and see that things are getting better. And then where they're not, we need to be seen to act as well.
Yeah, thank you. And have you worked with the trade unions on addressing this culture?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I meet regularly with colleagues from Prospect, GMB, Unite, and they're a key ally in this area, and they too will raise concerns directly with us, which I welcome, and we address them appropriately.
Thank you very much. Luke Murphy.
Question 11. Yeah, sorry. I should have declared also my membership of GMB and Unite earlier. So your last 5-year strategy was consulted on in 2020 and published in March 2021. Will you be putting out a similar consultation next year?
Yeah, so Strategy 5, so we're obliged under the Energy Act that sets up the NDA to produce a strategy every 5 years, so we're now into 5. We've been around for 20 years now, and we will be consulting early in the new year on that document.
What are the biggest changes that you might expect this time?
The biggest changes will be about how we can see technology improving what we do, whether that is some of the things we talked about earlier, but potentially beyond that. We also want to reflect on the end state, so what's the ultimate end state of our sites likely to be, and that's an area I think we'd like to consult on as we think about it. And then I think with the spending review and the potential for a tighter fiscal settlement for us over the next 5 to 10 years potentially, looking where we can make productivity improvements and do more for less. Yeah.
Reflecting on the current strategy, what do you think are the biggest successes and failures or areas for improvement of that strategy?
Well, so the biggest successes have got to be that we are now for the first time cleaning up all of the legacy ponds and silos at Sellafield. It's not that long ago there was no technical solution. We didn't know how we were going to do it, and now we've proven on all of them that we can do it. It's a matter of pace, and as we said earlier, we're not meeting our operational targets there. We are proceeding cautiously, but great success in cleaning up those. I think we've also been successful in, to use one of our phrases, being trusted to do more. In other words, the AGRs now will be entrusted to the NDA for decommissioning, so that's a vote of confidence in our capability, in our strategy. And I think thirdly, and finally, the success of being able to recruit and retain people is something I never take for granted, but we've got some fantastic people in our business, the very best in their field, dedicated every day to making a positive difference. So that's on the downside. Yeah, we've not made as much progress as I would have hoped on the high hazard areas. Our capital projects efficiency is not where it needs to be, as highlighted in the NAO report. And in answer to the questions about culture, Chair, the overall culture in the NDA is not yet where it needs to be. We are making progress, and I think bringing in the younger generation is a massive help in there in that regard. So, yeah.
Chris Chope.
It's a brief one, and I'm sorry I wasn't here at the beginning. I've been at the procedure committee. But can I ask, nuclear is described by the government as clean power. Almost all the evidence you've been giving today has been about the waste and the contamination and the need for cleaning up as a result of nuclear power. So do you think that to describe nuclear as clean power is a misnomer?
No, I think certainly low carbon is a fair description of nuclear, and again, it comes down to semantics really, but you know, it's a lot cleaner than many other sources. I think perhaps the bias you've heard today is because we are the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority. We're not the Nuclear Development Authority, and it's not our job to develop new.
But it's not for you. Would you describe, for example, nuclear as cleaner than gas?
I would, yes.
Why?
Yes.
Why would you say that?
Well, because we're not depositing tons and tons of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We've got a much smaller, measurable quantity of waste which we can control and ultimately put it away safely without heating up the planet. So in that sense, I believe it is a cleaner source than natural gas.
You also, just for Chris's benefit as well, you might want to repeat what you said earlier about the more efficient
That's right.
decommissioning processes of new nuclear compared to the historical challenges. Yeah.
Future nuclear reactors will be much more efficient at the use of fuel, and so be smaller volumes per unit of power generated in the future than there has been in the past.
But your answer is based on the premise that CO2 emissions are innately dirty.
Well, that's interesting. If clean power is intended to help protect the planet, minimise the impact of humans on climate change, and allow us to have energy security, then yes, I am basing it on that premise. Yeah.
And the reason I ask is because there's a lot of confusion amongst members of the public.
Yeah.
Because obviously they know that CO2 is not in itself inherently dirty, and they don't want to lose access to gas. And there is, as we heard from one of my colleagues, quite a lot of scepticism about nuclear, and obviously people look at Germany and see that they are preferring to carry on with coal rather than nuclear.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, they are trying to phase coal out, to be fair to Chris. But anyway, right. Can I?
Sorry, Chair.
Julie.
Yeah, sorry. Just to circle back on the strategy, and I should have declared my membership of the APPG for nuclear, and I am also a Prospect trade union member. Just to circle back on the strategy, I think in your last strategy document, you were anticipating high-level waste being transferred into the GDF in 2075. You anticipating any shift in that?
No, we're holding that date at 2075.
Thank you.
Yep.
Great. Well, thank you all very much. Can I thank David Peattie, Euan, Hutton and Corhyn Parr for your evidence this afternoon, and wish everybody a very Merry Christmas and a prosperous New Year. And with that, the sitting is ended. Order, order.